Welcome to another exciting episode of American Warrior Radio, coming to you since 2009. If you or someone you know has ever worn the uniform of the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard, Space Force, or National Guard or Reserves, you've come to the right place, American Warrior Radio. We're always efforting to bring you news, notes, interviews, and current events for all things military and veteran related. The bumper music for American Warrior Radio is provided by none other than combat veteran and mill hop artist Stephen Hobbs. Thank you, Stephen. With that said, let's kick the tires and light the fires and get this episode off the ground. Hi, everybody. Garen Cohen with American Warrior Radio Show. So glad you joined us. And remember what I always say, please share this information. Talk to your friends, your coworkers, people you go to church with. Get them to subscribe to the YouTube channel. That's how we're going to grow this free information. Well, we have another great guest, and I've known this woman for a long time now. A very accomplished gal, none other than Colonel Karen Gregory, retired Air Force. Hi, Colonel. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Well, I'm doing good also. The new year is upon us, and 2024 is going to be spectacular. And I know you have great plans. You and your husband stay busy in so many ways. But for our viewers, give a little background on yourself. When you went into the service, and what you've done.
Okay. So it was a long, long time ago, once upon a time. But basically, I entered the Air Force active duty in 1997 as a behavior scientist and worked more along what most people would know as personnel, but I was actually a behavior scientist. So 6-1 shreds, truly scientific work, if you will, but really around people and numbers. So I did that for 12 years, active duty, competing interests with careers with husband. And so went reserve, literally got out of the Air Force active duty one day, and the very next day swore in as an Air Force reservist. And with that, I was still a behavior scientist, but right about that time, they were actually dissolving the career field and turned our 61B shred into a 14F shred, which is information operations. And so I became an information operations officer, which then meant a lot more headquarters type work. So I worked at SOCOM a couple times, at the Pentagon, and a couple of other great locations, but also did 12 years as a reservist. And so retired in September 21. COVID kind of put a finality to that. So I was like, okay, I think it's time after 24 years. So yes, very blessed, very fortunate to have the opportunity to get to do the things that I got to do.
Especially in the reserves, because you mentioned that you were active duty and then career fields changing and all this stuff, but you accomplished a whole lot even in the reserves.
Yeah, I was very fortunate. Actually, I would say my 12 years of active duty set me up nicely for the work I got to do in the reserve. And partly because it was such a small contingent of folks. I mean, the behavior scientists, and same with the 14F, the IO career field. There's less than 100. There might be maybe around 120 to date. But back then there was less than, it was like 75, 80 people max. And so
pretty small.
It really got to where they wanted to grow that career field, which is what led to some of the headquarters still operational, working more in psychological operations and information operations, especially at SOCOM when I did that stint both times. But then that actually prepped me to get to go to the Pentagon. They actually asked me to come up there because I was the senior ranking person across the active duty and the reserve, and so they wanted to basically tap that brain before I went and retired to make sure we set up that 14F transition career field, set them up well, because there was no schoolhouse or anything at that point. And that was about 2017. And so it was a good 3 or 4 years to really get to work at Pentagon, really have a true impact on the 14F career field for the future of it. So, yep, just super fortunate.
I guess so. Now we're talking with Colonel retired Karen Gregory. When you went into the service originally, you were commissioned?
Yes. So I was ROTC grad and got my commission through Fayetteville State, North Carolina, and basically went from there to my first active duty base at Randolph Air Force Base, which I was petrified, honestly, Garen, because I don't know if you realize like how many, like back then, it was a long time ago, but I'm a young lieutenant and there's like lots and lots of GOs, right? So they're everywhere, Randolph. And I'm like this brand new little lieutenant. And so
Well,
obviously it all worked out. 24 years later, I ended up at the Pentagon and I'm just a little old lieutenant colonel. So,
yeah. So, but you raise a good point. It's something I always ask our female guests when you went in the service. Well, let me just say this. Would you recommend young ladies, whether they're just going to enlist or whether they're going to seek a commission, would you recommend that they go in the service, or what were the challenges facing you as a female, a young lieutenant back then?
yeah, so I definitely would. I'm still big on, my dad was Army, retired Army. I worked a lot with Army, obviously working in psychological operations. And so I kind of grew up knowing that and honestly very comfortable in that space because a lot of my work, it was at Fort Bragg. I mean, so I worked a lot with Army, grew up Army. But I would say definitely would recommend Air Force, and quite frankly, not to push out any of the other services, but definitely going to recommend my service. And Coast Guard, the mission set and just everything is so cool, honestly. And they tend to be very women friendly. Not saying other services aren't, but if I had my pick, that would be for my push. Air Force, Coast Guard, definitely look into it. Just cool mission sets. And I would say, in terms of a representation of women in the military, those are some of the higher representations as well. So I didn't have, I will say, I would like to believe I didn't have challenges because of my gender, though that would be quite naive to say that. I can say this, that I have a lot of female comrades, if you will, that had what I would say a lot bigger challenges than I did, like serious
Harassment,
legal.
have you?
Yeah, exactly. Where there are legal issues even involved, and mostly I didn't have that. But I can tell you, yes, I remember a time, no assignments, no names to be mentioned, but I was basically told by my career field manager, "Hey, if you have dinner with me and get a little chummy, I'll make sure you get your next assignment." And so things like that. I mean, that's just one example. I'm sure I had other issues like I said, I'd like to believe it wasn't gender. You don't always see eye to eye with everybody. And of course, even in the Air Force, we're still somewhere around 82% male dominated. And then I worked in special ops, which was definitely male dominated. We're about 6%. Yeah, SOCOM. And it's about 6% female in special operations career fields. And so I will say this, though, Garen, interestingly, and I was just having this conversation with my friends. He was Army. We call him a knuckle dragger, right? Enlisted senior NCO, great guy, since retired as well. And I was talking to him about this, and I said, when I had my least amount of issues was actually when I worked in special operations. And we both kind of just came to the understanding, if you will, to say that was probably because it's all about the pointy end of the spear. I'm not saying I'm not here to take away from anybody or to say that things don't happen wherever you're at. But I would say my own experience, I had the least amount of issues when I was working in special operations both times, which was probably about a total of about 7 years for me, in respective of the 24 years. And I think it was because everybody is just so, lives matter. It's kind of like 920th Rescue Wing. I didn't have any issues there ever come up that were gender specific. And it's really about like saving lives, right? The pointy end of the spear. We don't have time for like nonsense. And so
that mutual respect of getting the mission done, all that other stuff aside.
Yeah. And so, for people to kind of quickly make the assumption, and I would call it that assumption that, only 6% women in special operations type support, career fields, that there would be more issues because there's less women. My experience has been the exact opposite. When I worked in those high ops tempo, like pointy end of the spear, like let's get after mission, let's save lives, like what is really matters. There was not time for nonsense. I never experienced it. Unfortunately, I did in other, like I said, other areas of my career, but nothing, in my opinion, nothing egregious as what I've seen other women have experienced, unfortunately.
Right. And that's good. I'm glad to hear that you had a great experience. And I think that's encouragement to those ladies that do aspire to SOCOM type stuff where you're really working as a team. As you said, 920th rescue, life is the priority there. So, but the games play out in so many other ways, in so many other areas. Military sexual trauma is a real issue, and we're not discounting that. We're just observing that you had a great experience, and that's what we want for every woman, because you have so much to contribute. Since retiring, what are you up to?
So guess what? I'm working for the Air Force again. So I took a little stint. So as you know, I actually owned a company for a while, for about 10 years. Sold that right before COVID. Thank you, Jesus. I kid you not, because no one knew COVID was coming, right? And so that really was a blessing. But I had an offer to do a little bit of consulting work for a 3-letter agency out of the National Capital Region, 100% remote. Again, all of this before COVID. And so I started doing some consulting work. Next thing I know, honestly, COVID happened, then a full-time job offer happened. Hey, we'll keep it remote. And so 4 years later, I've been continuing to do that work. It's just awesome. It's awesome because I feel so blessed, because everything that I did in that 24 years, whether it be more of a support, kind of what I'll call more of that personnel, support type work, even though, it is a lot of statistical data analysis type work around people specifically. Even though, I got to do all of that, I also got to work in that information operations career field and actually see the impact, like I said, with special ops at headquarters level, but see that trickle down. And actually even folks that I'd worked with there in other services came back and said, hey, we use the stuff that we developed at headquarters, and we actually put it out to our troops, and they are using it.
Wow.
And so like all of that,
good.
yeah, I mean, like, you want to talk about tremendous impact. You're like, good, now I can actually see it. And that's something I always like to share with folks too. A lot of things that we do, sometimes we don't see the impact. It can take years, for it to kind of come to fruition. But the beauty in all of that is that I work in an organization that is really very much aligned with information operations. They actually work with the J3 out of J3, J2, J6 out of the Pentagon, where I used to work. And it's all focused on cyber, IO, artificial intelligence, AI, machine learning. So the mission set is still very much aligned with what I did when I was in a uniform, but I get to work on the people side of it, and really in that more assessment and development of the organization and the people within that organization, so that we can meet missions successfully. So it's super cool.
That warms my heart, though, that you're still utilizing all of your professional skills in helping move the mission forward. And I just want to thank you so much for all of your years of service and for joining us here today on American Warrior Radio Show. Hopefully, when you have a little nugget you can share with us in a future, we'll get you back on. But we've been talking with Karen Gregory, U.S. Air Force retired. Thank you so much, Karen. Have a blessed day and a happy New Year.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you for having me. Happy New Year, everyone.
Happy New Year. And everybody, share, subscribe, and don't forget, thank a vet.
Hi everyone, it's Garen Cohn with American Warrior Radio. I'm here with my good friend Christian. We're here to deliver a very important message about a crisis in our land.
Suicide prevention, more specifically, veteran suicide prevention.
22 a day are taking their own lives. This must stop. This can't continue. If you or someone you know is contemplating suicide, please know that God has tomorrow planned for you. Don't take your own life. And just remember, suicide is a permanent solution
to a temporary problem.